So, Kate, what have we got today?
Robert, we have battlefields strewn with blood. It is the real-life Game of Thrones. It's the Wars of the Roses.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Queens, Kings, and Dastardly Things. I'm Robert Hardman, Daily Mail columnist and royal biographer. I'm joined as ever by Professor Kate Williams, royal biographer. Hello, Kate. And today we're doing proper Dastardly Kings stuff, although there are a lot of Dastardly Queens in this one. We are doing the Wars of the Roses because it really does matter. Kate, why does it matter?
The Wars of the Roses, this conflict that tore the country apart for over 30 years, brother against brother, father against son, all these towns and cities and castles across the country pulled into this battle. And it matters because it shaped the monarchy that we have today. Mm-hmm. And also this incredibly bloody period. I mean, as we'll talk about, some of the battles are, the idea of chivalry is gone. Some of these battles are brutal. It has inspired poets, playwrights, Shakespeare, artists, and of course modern writers. Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones. So we have the Wars of the Roses to thank for the Game of Thrones, because it's two big families fighting for the throne, and the names are even quite similar, aren't
they?
The
Lannisters are the Lancasters,
okay,
and the Starks are the Yorks. To look at the actual conflict itself, it's two sides of the same family: the Plantagenet family, the Lancasters, and the Yorks, and they are battling it out for the throne. And this causes so many bloody battles. But at the same time, I think there's two things that I think we often forget about the Wars of the Roses. Number one, there were periods of peace during the Wars of the Roses. And for me, there are twists.
It's important to say wars, plural, of the Roses.
There are many of them. And there are twists of fate by which I think that had there not been a certain king on the throne, things would have been very different. When a boy king comes to the throne, things get very complicated. And the other point, of course, is that it was never known as the Wars of the Roses at the time. This conflict that we would say roughly began with the Battle of St Albans in 1455. St Albans had a tough time and ended with the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, or that went on before and after. That this conflict really was characterised in the 19th century as the Wars of the Roses. Sir Walter Scott, the great populariser of medieval visions, had this idea of the red rose of the Lancasters against the white rose of the Yorks. Now, he got that idea from Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 1, because, Robert, if you think that there was the vision of aristocrats and nobles battling each other to the death, two sides of the same family never agreeing, and then someone popping up and uniting both sides of the road happily ever after in Henry VII, I mean, who's this all benefiting?
Well, Kate, they always say that history is written by the victors, and of course the Shakespeare version has those wonderful Tudors putting England back together and making it all wonderful.
Happily ever after. There's this fascinating irony to me about the fact that it's seen as Henry VII, who's the victor of the Wars of the Roses, unites the red and the white rose and the Tudor rose, because everyone else who's fighting pretty much in the last 30 years have a real claim to the throne. And then you have Henry VII, whose claim to the throne, I would argue, is pretty infinitesimal. So it's rather like everyone fighting over a massive banquet that they've made. Who's going to eat it? And then while they're arguing,
it'd be a bit like a kind of war between sort of Prince Charles, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward, and they all fight a sort of bloody battle that goes on for years, and then right at the end,
and then they're all dead.
Then at the end of it, I don't know, the Duke of Kent's son, Earl of St Andrews, comes along and takes the throne.
I'll have it, which I find is so funny. And it does suit the Tudors to make this propaganda of bloody battle. And there is periods of peace, but of course it's difficult for those who live in these towns, these areas, these villages, those who expected to fight with their lords through feudalism. And it is ordinary families who end up being riven by this. And as we know, people have long memories in battle. You can't just think, I've killed the father, that's the end of it. Because when his son hits 18, the son's going to want revenge. The Wars of the Roses encompasses some of the huge characters of the period. Henry VII, Henry V, even Joan of Arc, Margaret of Anjou, now there's a warrior queen, and all these gigantic characters, and they are caught in this massive battle. And to me, I might say, now some might say it's a bit specious, but I might say that all of the Wars of the Roses comes down to two things: giving your sons too many presents and not washing your hands. So let that be a warning to you, Robert.
Well,
Not too many presents to your sons.
Okay, well, I think we'll have to unpick that, as they say. Let's go back to the start, Kate, because, as you say, as nobody ever said at the time, "Sire, the wars of the roses have begun."
Yes, they call it civil war often.
They would have just, they probably didn't even think of it as a war. It's like,
Yeah.
we're going to go and have,
Back we go.
one battle after another. But you don't really have, I don't think you have at the time any sense of being in a war. I mean, that's how we conveniently look back on it with hindsight. But let's go back to the start. I mean, essentially, it's Edward III, going way, way back to the 14th century. He's to blame for all this, isn't he? Because he has too many sons, and as you say, he gives them all dukedoms and land, and they all want to be king.
Edward III is a king for 50 years, an extraordinarily sort of powerful king. His father, Edward II, was a very bad king. So Edward III has a lot of sons, and he wants to pacify the country in terms of ruling these large unwieldy areas, but also pacify his sons. So he gives them these gigantic dukedoms, and these mean independence, and these mean money. Now, many of them we'd recognise. The Duchy of Cornwall is still the possession of the Prince of Wales now. But the two most important ones for our story are the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of York.
Oh no, there's going to be a Duke of York causing trouble. Who knew? Who could possibly have imagined that?
And of course, Robert, we still have the Duchy of Lancaster today.
Yeah, Duchy of Lancaster today is the monarch's chief source of income. I mean, today, you have the sovereign grant, which is the money that the king receives to pay for the sort of apparatus of monarchy, if you like. But all the royal stuff and all the other royal relatives and most royal bills are met out of what's called the privy purse, which is the money from the Duchy of Lancaster. And then, as you say, the Duchy of Cornwall, which is all the money that goes to Prince William. It's always for the heir to the throne. They are the two big duchies that prop up today's royal family. Cornwall for the heir, Lancaster for the monarch, and as you say, they're created by Edward III, and there is a direct link between these duchies and the Wars of the Roses.
The two presents to your sons under that Christmas tree in 1362 are the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of York. Lancaster goes to John of Gaunt, who's this big figure in all of our story. He's looming over a lot of it in terms of his bloodline, and York goes to Edmund. Well, this all seems great, and then we've got all these sons. The sons of Edward III don't have many children because they're off fighting in France. And when Edward III dies, there's a boy king, Richard, who comes to the throne, age 10. And having a boy king is a disaster because all these adults try and move in and get the power. But we're going to kind of fast forward through that, right through to Henry V. Henry V comes to the throne, and it seems like everyone's problems are over. He's super king.
He's the hero.
Superman. We've got Henry V. He's handsome, he's strong, he's powerful, and has this excellent strategy to try and divert attention from domestic problems. I'll go and beat up the French. Marvellous. And unlike other kings, he's a very effective war leader. He goes to Agincourt. He makes these really sensational incursions into French territory. He also marries the French princess, Catherine of Valois, daughter of the king. She arrives at just 18. She falls pregnant very swiftly, and everything seems perfect. Henry's powerful. He's got loads of France, and he's got a son. And then he goes back to war, and he catches dysentery. This is what I was saying about not washing your hand. Oh. And Dan Snow, the brilliant historian, has this very interesting point that this is a sliding doors moment. If it wasn't for Henry not washing his hands, then we might have England and France still bonding together. We might still be eating baguettes. One big England-France conglomerate. Jolly times.
There might never have been Brexit.
There might never have been Brexit, and we'd never need a passport to go on the Eurostar.
All because Henry V had mucky hands and
caught dysentery. Well, poor him. So he dies in 1422.
Where does he die, by the way?
He dies in France in the sliding doors moment. In a pretty miserable end to this great grand king. And then we have a baby king once more. Henry VI is 9 months old. His mother is French. And the efforts are made to push her out because she was the enemy. You push her out. And the boy king, baby king, is on the throne. And baby kings are a disaster. I think had Henry V continued, we would not have had what we see, the struggles for the throne. All these noble men want to marry Catherine of Valois. She's young. She is the widow of Henry V. She's the mother of the future king, Henry VI. But what happens? She marries Owen Tudor, a Welshman who we think was a steward in her household.
So basically the Dowager Queen marries the butler.
Marries the butler, and this is, of course, against the law in so many ways, because Welsh people, my ancestors, are not equal citizens. Many laws restrict Welsh people. So Catherine's married a servant and a Welsh man. She has 2 sons by Owen Tudor, and it's a very happy marriage. Henry VI is this boy king, and as he grows older, Henry VI is a complicated figure because people say he's very stupid, and I think he's a very innocent soul. He's the wrong type of king for this type of time, when it's his bloodshed and warrior king and power. He's actually a peacemaker, and I think a rather sweet, innocent person. He's very nice to his 2 half-brothers, Jasper and Edmund, and has them at court. I mean, I think that perhaps Henry was a rather lonely young man and boy, and these half-brothers, they don't seem to be trying to seize from him in the way that other people are. So he's very kind to them. And things go quite well. But what is happening at the same time as Henry VI on the throne is that France is being lost, is that Henry V's incredible gains in France are being beaten back. And so in 1449, 1450, we have these massive losses. Normandy is lost, Aquitaine is lost in a few years. I mean, these are great parts of the English Empire in France, and they lose them.
And in those days, if you're a monarch, I mean, it is the worst thing you can do, isn't it? It's just to lose territory.
Lose territory, that's
be
it.
beaten. I mean, there's no you gave it a good shot, sire. No, I mean you're toast. I mean, let's remember at the same time. I mean, Henry, he as you say, he is this sort of slightly ethereal Mr. Nice Guy, wrong for the times. I mean, he did leave behind 2 of the, I think, most stunning buildings in the country, which is King's College, Cambridge, and Eton College in Berkshire.
You're right, Robert. He's a peaceful soul. He values education. And in this world, that's not valued. And what's the problem? Is that he's lost parts of France. And he's married to Margaret of Anjou. He's married to Margaret of Anjou in 1445. Now, she is an impoverished French princess. She's married to him at age 15. No one expects very much. In fact, she doesn't even come with a dowry because the British are because the English are so down in France, they can't even get a dowry out of her father. And also her father gets territory in France for agreeing to the marriage. So it's the total reversal of what you'd expect.
So
you get all the presents from the lady.
England's already on the skids.
They're on the back foot.
In France, and there's this decision, right, Henry, you need to marry this French princess to sort of try and hold the line. Is that the idea? By marrying Margaret of Anjou, perhaps we won't lose quite so much.
It's an alliance, certainly. And, of course, this is who kings should marry. Kings have to marry other royals. And things seem to be going reasonably well despite the losses. Margaret takes some time to fall pregnant, and there's commentary about that. But after 8 years, she falls pregnant and gives birth to a son in 1453. This is rejoicing. But around the same time, Henry, I think he really has what we call now as a nervous breakdown. He's overwhelmed with the losses in France, with all kinds of pressures upon him. And he's a king who is made for peace. And also, Margaret of Anjou, she's a powerful figure. But when you give birth, you're sidelined for that period. You have to go into a darkened room with just ladies for a couple of weeks before and a couple of weeks after. And of course, they've got no scientific clue as to when due date necessarily is. So you could be kept in seclusion for ages and ages. So really, Margaret is excluded at the moment when her husband most needs her. And that's when his cousin, Richard of York, now those Yorks have been quiet for a long time. That's when Richard of York, his cousin, comes back and says, I'll be Lord Protector. I'm going to help. Marvellous. Helpful. Well, when the baby's born, poor Henry doesn't recognise the baby. He's just overwhelmed. He's suffering so much. And this is the moment when Richard of York and his supporters move in for the kill. And this is the beginning, strictly speaking, of the Wars of the Roses.
So, Kate, we have identified the start, if you like, of the Wars of the Roses. Henry VI has basically lost it. Richard of York has stepped in and said, I'm going to be like a regent, a protector, I'll take charge. And Margaret of Anjou, who is Henry's wife, says, oh, no, you don't. And their forces meet at the Battle of St. Albans.
And at the Battle of St. Albans, we really have the king is there, Richard of York is there. It's Lancaster versus York. And
Lancaster being Henry VI.
Henry VI.
And York being Richard of York.
Richard of York. So we have the first official
Rose on
battle.
rose.
Rose on rose. Rose on rose. Poor old St Albans. I mean, I really do feel for them. They've got another battle coming up as well. But St Albans is a strategic position. It's near London. This is where the two armies meet. And really, this is actually not too bloody a battle. There are reasonably low numbers of casualties. But what happens is the significant players around Henry VI, they are killed, particularly Somerset, who before one of the ladies who write the Paston letters, those famous Paston letters, they say, oh, everything that you need in the kingdom goes through him. So Somerset is killed, the great supporters of Henry VI are killed, and Henry VI himself is found in a tanner's shop, really hiding, and they take him out, they take him prisoner from this tanner's shop. Now, of course, tanner shops are quite smelly places, urine.
Where they made leather.
Yeah, urine and everything. This isn't where you normally find a king. He's taken out, past all the bodies, and really he is now prisoner. Henry is now the prisoner. Richard says, oh, I only went to war with you because I was worried about those bad influences around you. I'm just trying to help. But really, everyone knows that Henry is prisoner. They all go back to London. It seems like a peace. But in the following year, Henry gets his groove back. Henry says, oh, I think I'm fine now, everyone, because there was a thought about maybe we should put Richard on the throne. But then everyone thinks this isn't possible. We still have the king. We still have a son. We can't start deposing people because they're a bit wimpy. Let's just do what we've always did and get good advisors in to rule it all. And so Henry says, well, okay, I'm feeling a bit better now. I'm going to get my groove back. And then, this is one of my favourite bits. It's in the following year, Henry has this marvellous plan because he wants to bring peace. He sets up a love parade in London by which everyone who's been arguing are all going to walk down the streets holding hands. I think happily ever after. And I just think it's a bit like primary school, isn't it? When everyone who's been fighting now hold hands and say sorry. So everyone's in the love parade.
Sounds very Henry, doesn't it? I mean, this is going back to this.
We need more Henrys.
This sort of fluffy dreamer.
We need more Henrys in the world. A love parade. And who's at the back of the love parade, walking together? It is Margaret of Anjou and the Duke of York. And you can just imagine they're standing there saying, "Yes, great to see you, real enemies." And everyone knows while they're watching what's going on. And in a way, historians have said this, and it's quite interesting. It's an excellent book on the Wars of the Roses by Dan Jones. And, this Love Day actually makes the divisions more entrenched because they've really said, you're on this side, you're on that side. And it's not going to last long till Richard of York starts getting cross again. And he starts getting cross again in a few years. But we must just stop because something happens in 1457 that's very important. And we've got to go back now to the Tudors. So Owen Tudor married Catherine of Valois, had 2 children.
It's the butler who married Henry V's widow.
Happily ever after. Yep. She dies. Owen's still alive. The Welsh brothers, half-brothers, are still alive. And as I said, as we were saying, Henry VI is really fond of them. So he gives Edmund this amazing marriage to this young lady who is pretty much the richest heiress on the planet, I'd say, Margaret Beaufort. And Margaret Beaufort is just 12 when she marries him. And this is, we're going to have to go back to John of Gaunt here. So John of Gaunt, we remember him, don't we? Yep. John of Gaunt, he was the son of Edward III.
And he got the Duchy of Lancaster.
He got the Duchy of Lancaster.
Which, to this day, the king still gets all his money. So it's lots of pretty top-quality land and possessions.
Yes, worth a fortune then, worth a fortune now. John of Gaunt, he has a wife, but he also has a mistress who he really loves. And when the wife dies, this mistress, Catherine Swynford, he marries her. Now, they've had children together, and they're obviously very happy. Alison Weir's done some excellent scholarship on Catherine Swynford, and she found that in his will, he leaves Catherine all the beds that they've slept in together. So clearly it was a very happy marriage. These children are legitimised, these are legitimate children. But there's one condition. They don't get the throne.
That was going to be the solution if just jumping forward a few centuries, but if Princess Margaret had married Group Captain Peter Townsend, the deal on the table was that's fine, but your children from that marriage cannot be in line to the throne. So,
fascinating.
So through history, there are occasionally these deals done, which are okay, well, we'll put up with this,
But
you're not going to get the throne.
don't think those kids are getting anywhere near the throne. Now, Margaret and Townsend wouldn't have ever got near the throne because obviously there are many other heirs. This wasn't really the case. Many of the actual legitimate line started dying out, and the Catherine Swynford line were, I will survive. They were survivors. And one of these is Margaret Beaufort. So she has a line back to John of Gaunt. Yes, not the quite right one, not the quite right side of the bedsheet, but still she has that. She's got loads of money, and she's married to Edmund Tudor, the half-brother of the king. They marry. She gives birth age 13 at Pembroke Castle. It's a very, very difficult birth. I mean, any birth for a girl that young is difficult, but particularly difficult. She never has another child. She gives birth in 1457.
Well, the man who's going to found the Tudor dynasty and give us all those Henrys and Elizabeth and everything else. It's Henry VII.
Absolutely, the future Henry VII. Now, you wouldn't think this. It's chilly, it's Pembroke Castle. She is excluded from the line to the throne. She's just a teenager. It's a nightmare birth. And sadly, her husband dies not too long afterwards, when the baby's still an infant from the plague. So you think that that was out. But Margaret Beaufort, who's kind of going to be Margaret Beaufort, who's skirting the sides of our story, she is the ultimate survivor. She's wealthy. She marries again. She is incredible the way she stays on the right side of monarchy.
Sorry to keep taking it back to universities here, but you've got Henry VI, who founds King's College, Cambridge, which is an amazing to this day college. Right next door, two down, is St John's College, Cambridge, which is another amazing and beautiful and very famous institution, and that's founded by Margaret Beaufort. So they do leave their marks.
They leave their mark. She is power, and great biography of her by Nicola Tallis. She is a woman of power, and what she wants, I mean, she's only 13. What she's determined to do is get that son of hers on the throne, which seems like the most ridiculous mission, most ridiculous mission impossible you could imagine. What is his claim? Her claim isn't really legitimate. And then he's not even the son of Henry V. He's a son of Catherine of Valois, and she was married to Henry V. So this is totally random. But still, she is determined.
Okay, Kate. So we've got this. This is the great sort of Tudor subplot. The Tudors are going to come back and kind of haunt us all later on. But let's go back to the central strand for now of the Wars of the Roses. Red Rose Lancaster v White Rose York. We've got this uneasy truce. We've got this rather fragile Henry VI, who's tried to have this sort of love day, as you say, this sort of, come on everyone, let's be nice.
Let's be nice. Let's all be friends.
Let's all be friends. It's clearly not going to work. So when do the cracks start to appear in that?
Cracks start to appear almost immediately. And what we see is that Margaret of Anjou is determined. She is a warrior queen. She has been excluded from politics by the men. That was a big mistake. I think perhaps they should have, if they'd have given her more responsibility, perhaps we might have seen something different. But she now has a son, and she is fighting for her son's right to take that throne. And she is very suspicious of Richard of York. Well, I mean, you would be, wouldn't you? What happens is he then groups around Ludlow, and she knows he's there. So essentially, Margaret takes her troop. We should just say, of course, that there's no standing army at this point. You're recruiting from various peasants and various feudal lords. So poor old peasants, I really do feel for them. They're told, okay, stop that, stop that with the hay.
Stop harvesting.
Yeah, stop harvesting. Get the pitchfork, whatever you've got, come on. And Margaret takes her army, and there are mercenaries in many of the Wars of the Roses armies, so thank goodness, because they're professional fighters. You've got Margaret, she gets her army, and she heads towards Richard, where she knows he's gathering at Ludlow. And when, essentially, Richard's forces see Margaret coming, it's this bloodless war. Richard panics. He makes a run for it. He runs away, and he leaves his wife, Cecily, and 3 of his children, who really think they can't just stay in Ludlow Castle and hope for the best. They actually go out, and they're found in Ludlow Marketplace, just like, okay, everyone, be nice to us. And Margaret essentially has got control once more. So she sees control. Richard's fled. It looks like Margaret's got power, but not for long. Now, Richard comes back, and the next battle is the Battle of Northampton, which happens not too long after. And what goes wrong here? It's really the weather. The weather is very bad. Margaret's, the cannons don't work. There's lots of wet weather. And essentially, this is a massive York victory for Richard of York. And Henry VI is captured. He's actually captured and taken back to London. Now, Richard doesn't say, look at my prisoner, everyone, look at him in his chains. It's not like parading Cleopatra. He's more like, I'm just trying to help the king because the king needs me. And then when they come back to London, Richard of York does something very shocking. He puts his hand on the throne.
And that's a no-no, is it? No one's allowed to touch the throne.
Well, that is saying, I want the throne. You put your hand on the throne, you're saying, I want it. Oh, no. Because the justification for all of this has been, I'm just trying to help, put the right advisors in. And the decision that's come to is that they're going to have this, what's called an Act of Accord. 1460 is a busy year. In 1458, 2 years ago, we had the Love Parade. Now everything's exploded. We have Ludlow, which Margaret wins in 1460. Then we have Northampton, which Margaret loses, and Richard wins.
Richard of York comes back to Northampton. It's all very rainy. It's wet. The cannons don't work. Margaret loses, and Henry is taken prisoner.
100%. And now the solution in October is something called an Act of Accord. And the idea is that Henry will rule till he dies, and then Richard of York gets the throne. Not his son, but Richard of York. And I think this is a bit like the Granita Pact. I think this is like a
I have to explain the Granita Pact. We're now jumping from medieval politics to Labour politics.
A medieval version of the Granita Pact. So the Granita Pact, take us through it, Robert.
So the Granita Pact is when both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were jostling for the leadership of the Labour Party after the death of the great John Smith. And they couldn't agree. And they sat down for dinner at a fashionable restaurant in North London called Granita, and that was when the deal was done that Tony Blair would be Prime Minister first and then he would make way for Gordon Brown afterwards, as indeed sort of more or less happened. But going back now from the tuna tartare in Islington back to... You went there?
I went there just to see if there are any pacts going on as a Granita tourist, because I believe it is now an estate agent, I think. It is no longer there. But this...
so here we've got a similar deal going on. The Act of Accord is like the Granita Pact. You've got
except they didn't fight each other at Northampton.
And they decided, okay, Henry, you can reign until you die, but when you're dead, I, Richard of York, I'm going to be king, and your son is not. That's the deal.
That's the deal, and
well, that's not going to get on with Margaret of Anjou, who is Henry's wife, power in the land, warrior queen, and mother of the guy who's just been told he's not going to be king.
She wants her son, Edward of Westminster, 100% on that throne. And in the following year, we have the Battle of Wakefield, and this is Margaret of Anjou. Margaret of Anjou has fled to Scotland. She gets a lot of Scottish fighters who the English are, of course, terrified of. She comes down and she meets Richard of York at Wakefield.
In Yorkshire.
And this is a cataclysmic battle. Richard is killed. And he refuses to surrender. One of his sons is killed. Richard is killed. And his head is taken and put on a pike. That is the end of the York threat. And just a little bit later, Margaret of Anjou also conquers someone who'd been very much the big ally of Richard of York, who is the Earl of Warwick. She conquers him at the Second Battle of St Albans. Poor old St Albans. What have they done to deserve this? You think of the poor old market traders saying, oh no, not again. We can't, oh no.
We've just tidied up after
we just tidied up the last one. Hide all your stuff, so quick. So poor old St Albans suffers again. But Margaret has had this incredible win. Richard is dead. Apparently, they put a fake little crown on his head on the stake. That is the end of the York threat. You'd think end of the War of the Roses.
And yet it's barely begun. So, Kate, the Wars of the Roses are at a crucial point, as we have just discussed. It's 1461. The year begins with, looks like Richard of York is riding high, except he ends up in battle with Margaret of Anjou, who's the wife of slightly mad Henry VI, and they meet at Wakefield. Richard is killed at the Battle of Wakefield. Margaret has another win at the Battle of St Albans. It looks like she's really taken the upper hand. But York's son, Edward, says, well, hang on, no, I'm going to be king now. And he gets himself crowned, doesn't he?
York's son, Edward, is everything that Henry VI was not. He's handsome, he's strong, he's a warrior, he's powerful. And the problem is that for Margaret of Anjou is that her son well, little Edward of Westminster, he's a great little chap, and she's training him to be a warrior king. At the Battle of St. Albans, she said to him, what should we do with those captive knights? He said, behead them. So she was training him to be ruthless. But he's only 8. People want...
Oh, really? He's having people executed at the age of 8. He's starting young, I suppose they did.
She was training him young, and she wanted a warrior king because she knows there's no choice, but he's not an adult, whereas Richard's son is an adult.
So we're in the situation where Henry VI is still technically king, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but Richard of York, now dead, his son Edward is sort of proclaimed King Edward IV in London. So we've effectively got 2 kings, right?
We've got 2 kings. Really, his friends proclaim him king. But he is saying, I am the right type of person to be king. You need a warrior king. Just look at this other guy. Lost France, keeps losing wars. His wife's fighting his battles for him. He's only got 1 son. And Edward is everything that Henry VI is not. He's powerful, he's handsome, he's charismatic. And really, Robert, the Wars of the Roses goes on so long that you see it. It often becomes blood feuds. People who've seen their fathers cut down, they go back and they fight brutally. And I think this is why we see so many quite brutal deaths, because many men are taking revenge for the death of their fathers. So Edward is claiming the throne, but taking revenge for the death of his father. And at the beginning of March, he says, I'm king, everyone. And at the end of March, there is the Battle of Towton, which is between Edward's forces, this Edward IV, and the forces of the other king, Henry VI forces, really commanded by Margaret of Anjou. And this is the Battle of Towton, which is the bloodiest battle, it is reputed to be, on English soil. Mass loss of men. Ever.
Oh.
Thousands and thousands of men are lost in this bloody, bloody battle at Towton.
So where is Towton, Kate?
Towton is in North Yorkshire, and these are where the 2 armies meet, because Margaret has gathered a lot of power in Scotland. And it takes place on a Sunday, which is usually doesn't happen. You don't fight on a Sunday. It's Palm Sunday, and it's snowing, and it's snowing in March. And this is a bloody, horrific battle, terrible conditions, very confusing conditions for the men fighting. And we estimate around 50,000 men were killed.
50,000. I mean, that's when you think that, say, first day of D-Day, we lost 1,500 men, 50,000. And they're all English. They're probably, as you say,
some Scots. So there'll be some Scots as well.
Yeah, but there will be sort of families who know each other probably on that battlefield, and it's absolute carnage.
It's absolute carnage, and it is this bloody battle. The Lancastrians try and flee. The Yorks pursue them. They pursue them and they cut them down, because this is not just a battle. This is not just a war. This, for so many now, is a feud. It is taking revenge for the death of your father or your uncle or your brother.
So not a lot of prisoners at Towton.
It is not a lot of prisoners. Henry flees, Margaret flees, their son flees. But who is king? Who is victor? It is this teenage superhero. It is Edward IV. He is now the king.
So at that point, Kate, we might say that's the end of the Wars of the Roses, except, of course, it isn't. You'll have to join us on the next episode of Queens, Kings and Dastardly Things. But for now, from me, Robert Hardman.
And from me, Kate Williams.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.